Great, thank you, BJ. And Commissioner Eskridge, good morning. Can you hear us?
Good morning. I can hear you just fine. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Just turned to 8 a.m., so I'll call the commission meeting for the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District to order. Welcome to all of our guests that are viewing us now with our new technology, having a camera in the room, and those that may be in the room. I don't see, oh, Amanda's gonna go through the virtual meeting guidance.
Thank you, President Hubble. So good morning, commissioners, members of the public and staff, both in the room and on virtual. To help ensure we have a smooth meeting, there are just a few decorum rules this morning. For today's meeting, commission and staff members are in person, a few online. However, we are live streaming the meeting on YouTube, and members of the public can attend virtually through Zoom. There is a new enhancement today at the meeting. We're trying out a new table view camera. When the presentation is up, you won't see it, but as everyone is discussing, we will turn it on to just enhance the experience. As a reminder to commissioners and staff who are presenting, please remember to state your name before speaking, and for those attending virtually, please face your microphones and toggle them on and off while speaking so otherwise others can utilize the mics. As a reminder, only 3 of the table mics can be live at a time. Lastly, as a reminder, the public chat has been disabled, but you can still rules, following them, and let's have a great meeting.
Okay, thank you. That will take us to announcements where John Martinson will introduce Corey Stark-Prohaska, the new maintenance mechanic.
Good morning. My name is John Martinson. I'm the mechanical maintenance supervisor. I would like to introduce you to our newest team member, Corey Stark-Prohaska. Corey started with us on July 10th. He was working at Michigan Precision Industries in Deerfield, Wisconsin, where he welded and fabricated, rebuilt gearboxes, repaired and diagnosed presses, grinding machines, coolant systems, and CNC equipment. He did a 2-year industrial maintenance program at Black Hawk Tech, a maintenance technician apprenticeship. When he has free time, he enjoys kayaking, tubing, boating, and snowboarding. He also likes hanging out with his girlfriend, family, and friends. Join me in welcoming Corey to the district. Thank you.
Welcome, Corey. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to Corey. And do we have any appearances by the public? Anybody in the room first that wants to speak? And do we have anybody, I don't see anybody in the room that wants to speak. Do we have anybody online that wants to speak? Don't they raise their hand or anything, Amanda, that you can see? I don't hear anybody weighing in over there, so we'll move on to the consent calendar where we have the approval of the minutes from the meeting of July 13th, cash statement operating fund, review and approval of sanitary sewer extension plans, the authorization of increased total project costs for the pavement improvements here, review of bids and award a contract for increase in total project costs for Lower Badger Mill Creek, Interceptor Phase 5, and an approved transaction amount and approved professional services agreement, an amendment, Northeast Interceptor, Wanakee Extension, capacity improvements. Do we have any questions on any of those items before we get a motion? Okay, I think there were 3 sewer extension plans, if I remember correctly. So do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
It's Wilson. I'll move approval of the items in the consent.
A motion by Commissioner Wilson. Do we have a second?
Commissioner Freeze, second.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner Freeze to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? None, motion carries. Thank you. So we'll move on to topics. The first is the acceptance of the draft 2024 capital improvement plan. I think you just had a brief presentation, Bill or Todd.
Good morning, Todd Giebert, Capital Planning Engineer. Last meeting, Bill Walker and I presented an overview of the draft 2024 CIP. At the meeting today, the purpose is really just to provide additional feedback, or get additional feedback from the Commission, and ask for your acceptance of the draft plan. So, with that, the things that we'd like to cover today, it will be much shorter than last time, the presentation, but we'd like to respond to some of the leftover questions from the last meeting about the plan, review just some of the basic financing plan highlights, any other comments that you may have, and then finally request acceptance of the plan. So to start with, the questions, these are the ones that we had left over from last time or comments that we've received. So I'll just go through them quickly one by one, both supporting information. So the first one is the 2024 budget realistic? Question really, I guess, by Commissioner Freeze. Comments after the meeting. I think the question, Greg, is essentially, it's a lot of spending in 2024. Do you think you can achieve past levels?
Sorry, this is Commissioner Freeze. You're right. It is not really meant as a pejorative question, but a lot of times, you know, us, and looking at past budgets for, you know, we have a large budget set of projects, right? And we don't historically, just looking at what we guys haven't been.
Okay.
That was really the.
Yeah, and that's the question we had when putting the plan together. So I think I understand your question perfectly. So this is the slide I showed last time. Again, the 6 years at the far right are what the projections are. And I did go further back on the left then to find out when we had similar levels of spending. So we did spend a similar amount in 2012, $36 million in that year. Adjusted for inflation, that would be about $50 million in today's dollars. So we are capable of putting out that much. That was the 11th addition to the plant, a major construction project. So that's what we see in this year's plan, though, for 2024. So I've broken out the 10 projects that we think will be in construction. And the colors represent, you know, the various states of the project. So the ones shown in red are actually under contract and in construction. The wastewater treatment plant HVAC and Station 4 rehab. The ones in orange, actually just approved, awarded a contract for Lower Badger Mill Interceptor Phase 5. And then the Pump Station 17 Force Main Relief at the far right is actually out for bid right now, and we'll be receiving bids in 2 weeks from today. So we're pretty far along on those 4. Then the other 6 are well along in detailed design. So we feel that these projects are on track and that we will be, you know, these represent by themselves over 80% of our spending for 2020. And I guess the other thing to note here is that they are fully staffed too. You know, staffing has been a concern in the past, but are actively being worked on by staff. The next question was, I think, Commissioner Bookland's, about how much will energy costs be reduced by implementing the low DO process, and then what if it doesn't work? So I did reach out to our project manager for this project. If you remember, this is a project that will involve improvements to our activated sludge system so that we can use lower levels of dissolved oxygen in the process. And it is a major change, and it is not widely utilized in the industry yet, so we're taking a cautious approach by having a separate project implement this at a partial scale, 25% of the plant. And then if it works, we'll expand that to the other areas of the plant. But to just the question of energy efficiency, I did ask our project manager, and he really couldn't put a number on it because we're just too early in the design. We actually had a workshop last month where we did the preliminary work of screening out alternatives. And this is a slide from that presentation from the consultant. And not to get into all the alternatives by any means, it's kind of insider baseball with all the acronyms, but essentially we've got the list down from 16 alternatives down to 5. And even among those 5, they'll have very different levels of efficiency. So, I think the thing we can say with confidence is that whatever we choose, it will use lower levels of energy. And the follow-up to that, I think, Commissioner Hubble, this is your question about what if it doesn't work. The last sentence there, for all the DO alternatives, the consultant will consider both low and conventional DO levels in the design. So if it doesn't work, we do have a fallback option. The next question was related to connection charges and essentially what happens when you can stop collecting them based on collection area. So as you know, we have 2 types of connection charges. The first is treatment plant connection charges. These are collected from new users in newly developing areas or redevelopment. And essentially, they're paying for a proportionate share, their proportionate share of the treatment plant facility. So as such, they're paying into whatever the value of the plant is at the time. So there really is not a limit to what we can collect there. It just will be collected over time. And that currently accounts for 50% of our charges, and it's going up because we're still phasing in that rate. Next charge, the conveyance facility connection charge. This is true cost recovery in that we're collecting from new users for facilities that we put in years ago to extend service. So there theoretically is a finite limit to what we can collect, but if you look at how our system breaks out, this is looking at primarily the southwest side of our system where we have a lot of development. The red, of course, is our service boundary. The blue is what's paid charges. So there's still a lot of areas that have not paid. That line, of course, will move out as we get new station requests. So we feel confident that the not in danger of, the period where we won't collect charges. And I guess another point to make on top of that is if that day ever does come, we will also be not expending money to build new facilities as well. So while our revenues might go down in that regard, our costs will too. Next question was related to service charge allocation and how each are apportioned to the budget. Fairly simple breakdown from our 2023 budget. See, about 1/3 of our service charge revenue goes to fund our debt service, and about 10% goes from cash transfers to the capital fund. Then the remaining 59% stays in the operating fund for operating expenses. So if you want to simplify it even further, 60% is essentially for operating expenses and 40% is used as. And the last question here that we listed was how do we invest our cash and what are the rate of returns? An engineer, I was told not to answer this question. I think that's very wise advice, but no, the serious answer is that we're doing a report on the audit next month, I believe, and the auditors are in a much better position to answer that. So before I get into the financial highlights, maybe I'll just pause there and see if there's any follow-up to those responses from anyone.
So, any questions? Ken?
For number 2, is there any?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think until we know the numbers, I would be very reluctant to answer that question or have a good answer for you. Again, it is the single largest energy use of the plant, so I don't know if there's a finite period, but there certainly will be a payback in terms. Yeah, I guess the other thing I would point out there, again, it's the energy reduction is certainly is a goal, but the overriding concern of the project is to replace the boards that really need to be replaced. Tanks.
Because I was going to kind of tie on to Ken. The situation really is that the equipment needs to be replaced now rather than later.
Yes.
And so it's not so much an energy upgrade as it is an equipment replacement where we may get an energy upgrade.
Very analogous to the heat and power project, where the engine generators have been rebuilt several times. They need to be replaced, right. And how do we optimize energy in that process of replacement?
I got a question on the Nine Springs Interceptor. And I recall when we brought in Verona and then did the extension up through Verona, north to bring in our west side of Madison. originally wasn't in the kind of intended service territory for the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor. Those, they have to pay their fair share of the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor, correct?
Correct.
And so they'll be a part of that whole cost will be then going over to, with the new upgrades, because it's not just condition repair, it's also some capacity, if I understand.
Correct. Yeah, and that, so I'd have to verify, but I'm almost sure. You know, our practice is to take downstream interceptor rates and roll them into upstream areas, in effect. Even though if they weren't included in the original basin, the downside of that, of course, is that you'll reach capacity sooner.
Right.
And then you'll have another, you know, the way our policy is now, we'll have another incremental rate to add on to that, that new users will pay. So
Well,
that's the approach.
Yeah, I'm asking because it occurred to me this week, meeting that I was, did all of that. I was basically told that, you know, it would probably be 30 to 40 years before the Nine Springs Valley would have to be, it wasn't so much condition to that they thought it, but in 40 years it might be the capacity issue. So it's a little bit earlier than the 40 years now. So that's just, and I can understand we're trying to get ahead of the curve too. But that's why I asked the question, because it occurred to me that years ago or 30 years ago, we were told it was going to be 40 years for any upgrades to the Nine Springs. It's a major interceptor that serves,
It is.
You know, a large territory.
Yes, 1965 it was started to be put in, and I think just the explosion of growth on the southwest side has accelerated that projection from, you know, for the 30 or 40 years.
Right, and that was part of my concern when we were doing like Verona, Adjournment Creek. I did Verona in the end, and it makes for an interesting thing because I think it was that no area has any one claim to an interceptor. Anyway, okay. Anybody else? Amanda?
Yeah, just a reminder, commissioners, when you speak, if you can get closer to the mic, they're having trouble hearing you on the virtual.
Thank you. Sarah, or I don't know if Marcia is available. Do you have any questions?
No, I'm good, thanks.
No additional at this time. Thank you.
Good morning.
Okay. Yeah, good morning. Okay. I don't see any other questions. Anybody else? And so do we have then motion to accept the
I have just a few more
oh,
slides on
that's right, you had the capital
financial
improvements.
plans. These before financing. So you saw, Bill showed these slides last time, but I think they're important. They're an important part of putting the plan together, so I'll walk through them again real fast. With the number of more projects that we have in this plan, the higher cost, debt, you know, and trying to keep service charges at modest increases, the 6 years of the plan, we have had to rely more on debt in this plan than last year's. You see that represented here, where principal obligations are going up from about $150 million in 2024 to about $230 million in 2029. Okay. That help? That's okay. Yeah, and all the borrowing will be through the Clean Water Fund still, and it's still at a very attractive interest rate. I looked this morning, and it's still at 2.1%. So even though there's closing interest rate hikes, it's still very attractive for us. This is kind of the same concept illustrated in this slide about our percentage of expenses. Anywhere from 65 to 80% of our expenses will be funded with debt. I wanted to call attention to the year 2022. I think at the last meeting someone brought up the issue that seemed rather high at 94% in that year that we borrowed. It actually was much higher than that. I went back and looked, and our loan draws in that year were $16 million. Our expenses were relatively low at $8 million. So actually the percentage was 200%. And And what that is reflecting is that delayed revenue that we get from the Clean Water Fund. So we have to have the expenses incurred first, and then we get the revenue later, and sometimes that can be several months. And in this case, it spanned a calendar year. So that's the effect you're seeing. Even with a 2-year average that smooths it out, it is a concern. So that's also reflected here in the capital fund reserves and how we'll put that together. So there's 2 things being represented here. First, we're trying to account for unplanned projects, an allocation of about $500,000 a year. But more importantly, that concept of delayed loan revenue comes into play here, so that we have to have enough money so that we have cash flow, don't have cash flow concerns. For the debt fund, just 2 things I want to point out. Again, the most important, that we have to have enough money in the debt service fund in any current year to pay the debt service for the next succeeding year. That's represented by the upper bound of the red shaded area. So you see that we're comfortably above that in the projected years of the plan, but not excessively so. And then the second point is that drop that you're seeing from 2023 to 2024. And what that's representing is we're transferring less from the operating fund into the debt service fund, and instead using that money to put into the capital fund, our cash reserves. So. And then finally, of course, a word about service charges. All those things kind of lead down this road of, trying to keep them at a reasonable level. We're showing an upper bound and a lower bound here, really reflect uncertainties and positions and benefit increases. But the bottom line is that service charge increases, we're trying to keep relatively flat around 9% through this. So that's all I had for the financial plan highlights, and the action we're asking for today is to approve the R7, to accept the draft plan for planning purposes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on the financials? Yeah, Ken, go ahead. I think it was the last meeting where Bill talked about the new requirements being put in by government related to the Clean Water Fund loan. So there's a lot more intricacies and things to have to manage to get the Clean Water Fund money with that. And so, but the question I think I had last week is, what happens if we miss something? All of a sudden, you're going through this whole process because it's typically after the project's been bid, right? And maybe even built. And all of a sudden you don't get your Clean Water Fund loan, nice rate of 2.5%, 3%, and we have to then go out into the open market. It just seems that with all the new conditions, a lot more work to make sure we're meeting them. That it's easy to maybe possibly for something to get missed.
Great point. One we've wondered about a lot, and we've met with Milwaukee because they have a lot more experience with the fund. They're a little further ahead always than we are with these type of things. And our experience, we've contacted DNR more than we ever have before about these new requirements, and I don't think they foresaw a lot of the difficulties people would have transitioning, so they're being very helpful. And the EPA too, in implementing this from what we can see. So actually just got a waiver approval of the projects, for this transition, which will kind of run out here in the next 6 months. But I guess the short answer is, so far they've been really good to work with, and I don't think it means denial of a loan. It's just kind of do this next time. And I think the implication that we're seeing is really going to be the cost of projects, having to buy domestic until supply chains can ramp up.
I thought of that over the course of the past 2 weeks, and it occurred to me that when we were here over the Great Recession, we kept talking about when we were doing projects, how many jobs were being created and stuff like that. So I can't be against these new, U.S. job things if 10 years ago we were talking about wanting to create jobs here in the nation. So, it's just something I'm concerned about in terms of making sure, not that I'm against it, because you can't be against it when 10 years ago we were saying we're supporting American jobs. So.
Yeah, I think the other pitfall will be hard. There is a waiver process for excessive costs, but we haven't navigated that process.
Yeah.
And that'll be tough, it's, you know, when do you have to get your foot in the door on that, in the
Yeah.
bidding cycle? So we haven't gone down that road yet.
Yeah, you don't know if it's excessive until you
Yeah.
get it, right?
Right.
Beth?
I have a question. It's kind of off base a little bit, but did we see any benefits from the infrastructure bill that could be applied to any of our projects? Have we, I assume we've looked at that and,
Not directly yet. This is actually kind of the downside of the infrastructure bill, if you will. There's certainly more money, but we've never had a trouble getting money before anyway. And we don't qualify for principal forgiveness, which is, I guess, the other key part of that bill. So, not yet, I would say. But there is other things like the lateral, Michael, you've been following that closer, for private lateral funding. It's certainly looking promising.
so is any of that kind of built in here, or is it too wishy-washy to really?
It's moving along. I don't know the current state, but I think, Paul, you would know much better than I would where the state of that is and how it might apply to us, but it's working its way through the system.
When if I could, before you go, Paul, this is Bill Walker, take a minute to expand on a couple of the points here. One, the private lateral reference is a provision to allow municipalities to use clean water loan funding, finance replacements of private laterals, home laterals. We would not be a beneficiary of that money. That's a way to improve. And the other point, at this EOR point, which I think is important, structure bill and generally speaking, federal money is aimed at communities and problems that we are relatively well-off communities work, and so by design generally don't benefit. I'm not saying we don't look for them. What I'm trying to do with this comment is lower everyone's expectations. Any spigot is open, but it's aimed at other people.
So is the driver, just so I'm clear, is the driver for the capital improvement?
That's very fair to say, yes.
Bill, I have one question on the reserve. Is that millions of dollars actually cash in the bank? Opposed to used in operating?
I think I'm not understanding your question. Yes, those are dollars that are set aside and not used for other purposes. And one way to emphasize that point, one of the largest reserve requirements is to have next year's debt service payments on hand. Water fund requirement. The whole point of that requirement is you're not committing that money to similar concept deriving the reserves in the capital fund. The point is to have money available. So if you're using other things, it's
We could have.
yes. And this I will give a little bit of a preview of the information that'll come with the audit. Couple points to know about how we manage our reserves. There are statutory requirements on what we may invest in. Conservative, that's a short summary of a 5-paragraph list of requirements. 2, we have a professional investment firm. Now, Todd stopped with saying nothing. I'm going to stop with those 2 points, and we'll leave it to the pros to say more.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? I got one. It might be kind of a difficult question to answer, but, you know, with a lot of the work that's being done, why, it seems to me that you're saying that there's kind of this urgency work done. So why all of a sudden the urgency? Why wasn't it known about, say, 3 years ago or something? Could have been smoothed over more years. Up? the liquid facilities plan, or, you know, or what is it that all of a sudden made such a high level of urgency compared to not knowing about it, to smooth it out if we had known about it?
I don't know if it's necessarily more urgent. I think maybe once we've gotten farther into an asset management plan, we saw the totality of it and just the age of the system in general, knowing that if we don't keep up with it and get things done on a regular basis, then we will be in a problem 5 or 10 years.
And just kind of one other point on that, you know, when I first started here up until recently, they always did big additions. So that one you pointed out in the graph, was it
2012.
12?
Yep.
That was the 11th edition, right? And we did the 12th edition, but I think when I started, we began like with 8th edition. They're all big additions at one point. And so part of me is wondering if we bound ourselves to higher costs because they kept doing big one-time projects 5 years. So you get what I'm saying? It's like everything comes due. It's like when you buy a car, you have your car and it gets to be 8 years old. You have to have a lot more service done on it. You know, so that's kind of what I'm wondering is, or is it just that worked well then? But I guess the point is that, you know, a lot of the plant was built at various in steps, right? It wasn't a gradual thing. It was like a big step, and then you waited a few years, you did another big step and another big step.
Yeah, a lot of those major additions were to add new processes, right?
Right.
New facilities, and I think what we're looking at now is we're more in an infrastructure renewal phase.
That's what I'm saying.
It requires more periodic work.
Because we did those additions that were new processes in that we had to step, and now all of a sudden, 30, 40 years later, they're coming in for revitalization.
Correct.
And renewal. I was just getting to that because I think it might help people here and the public hopefully understand what we're dealing with. That a lot of this stuff was built and it's coming due at the same point in time because it was built. A lot of these things were built at the same point in time. Large.
This is Michael Muka. You covered it very well. We have 2 major plans that we're implementing, the liquid processing facilities plan, and we're phasing that, and then, of course, the energy master plan. All of that is aging. We're ramping up the capital program long-term. Continue on our increased investment.
Okay, enough sermonizing by me. Tom?
In reviewing the capital plan, just wanted to thank the staff. I think you guys did a great job in putting this together. It's well thought out. It's what we need. It's good for the maintenance that's up right now. I have no problem making a motion to accept and adopt the resolution that's been proposed for the capital improvement plan, which is the caveat that it's going to be our job as commissioners to keep our rates where are reasonable for our customer owner communities. And that's just something we're going to have to do in the future. But a plan is something that we need to look at to prepare that. And I think this is pretty well done. Will give us some guidance when we're, so thank you.
Murphy, I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Wilson to accept the 2024 draft capital improvement plan, 2023-07, 27-R7, and was seconded by Commissioner Murphy. Commissioner Wilson, Commissioner Murphy, to accept the plan. Do we have any further comments or discussion? Anybody online, Sarah or Marcia?
Nope.
No questions.
Okay, good. So, all those in favor of the motion to approve the acceptance of the capital improvement plan, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Okay, thank you. So that will take us up to the employee engagement survey results. So, Michael, you're gonna introduce this?
Real quick, Michael, everyone at the table, can you just pull your mics closer to you? They're still having trouble hearing you online. I apologize for that.
Thank you, President Hubble. Michael Muka, Chief Engineer. I'd like to lead this process off. I'm really excited to be able to share our employee engagement results with you. We had an outstanding participation rate, 91%, which is, BJ will share, is unheard of, and I'm very proud of that, and it reflects that the district employees care about the work environment and are willing to share their ideas. There are bright spots that we feel good about, and we did add questions in the areas of safety, diversity, and leadership as important areas for us to focus on. And these scores affirm that these are good focus areas for us to get baseline information so we can focus our attention. With that, I'll turn it over to our consultant who has been managing the survey for us, BJ Rogers.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning, commissioners and district staff. This is actually a pretty exciting moment in the employee engagement assessment process for two reasons. One, to finally be sharing some of the results of the hard work of a number of your staff and over the last couple of months, but mainly because it represents a starting line more than a finishing line. While the survey is now historical and the data is accessible and available to us, the real work is about turning that data into something actionable, and that's why I think this particular approach to the process is useful and will serve the district well. So I'm glad to be here and excited to share these. I'm going to pull up some slides so that you can see what we're after. Are you seeing? Can I get a confirmation of what you're seeing from someone, Amanda? Is that?
So we're actually seeing something, but it's definitely not your presentation.
All right, let's try again. Let's try again. Hang on just a second here. All right, let me try and share again. Here we go.
There we go.
Better? Okay, great. I want to mention right up front that I think Michael's point about participation is one to really take a bit of pride in. It is it's a very good sign that employees at the district are engaged enough to want to share their opinions and bring their voice to the mix. So that's encouraging right from the get-go, and also just an affirmation of the value of the district's commission to understanding the employee experience. I've been working with the district for a couple of years now, and feel as though I have a reasonable insight into the state of affairs there. And I think this is an affirmation of an engaged and interested workforce. And in a world where workforce changes are pretty rampant right now, I think that's something to be encouraged by. I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of some of the background of this and then get into the results, but I want to make sure that everybody is kind of refreshed, or if you weren't here for the earlier part of this process, have access to some of that. So just very quickly, why do this project in the first place? One of the primary drivers, I'll sort of start at the bottom, which is what I mentioned up front, which is the ability to gather actionable data, to have information that managers and district staff and leadership can actually make some plans on. And this tool does that quite well. That's why I'm a fan of it. But more specifically, because there is research behind this tool and behind the work of the Gallup organization to suggest that 70% of the variance in team engagement is determined solely by the manager. And so this really is a manager's tool more than anything else. This is about giving staff who manage people insight into ways to improve the employee experience And, you know, for what it's worth, the employee experience and engagement are directly tied to productivity. So you can think of that however you want, but I tend to think of that as organizational impact, and that makes this process a worthwhile one from my perspective. Workforce development is a component of the strategic plan, and in order to engage in meaningful workforce development, it's important to have some baseline information overall to investigate the state of employee morale, generally speaking, and in response to some suggestion that might be an area of concern, and again, to understand and improve the employee experience overall. I want to highlight again the folks internally who have been working hard on this, the core team, with a particular shout out to Mike Lipsky and Amy Deming, who have really done the lion's share of the work here. But lots of voices internally, great questions from folks across the organization that shaped not only the survey, but how those results are being understood and shared with everyone. Let's just go through highlights and do some key takeaways before we look at the data specifically. 110 employees of the 122, I believe, that were eligible to responded. And that's where that 91% response rate comes from. 2 out of 3 employees rated overall satisfaction at a 4 or a 5 out of 5. 5 is extremely satisfied on that particular question. And it may suggest that issues of dissatisfaction or low morale may rest with a small but vocal group. When we look at the engagement index numbers, you'll see that this next bullet point, only 8% of district staff who completed the survey are actively disengaged. And because your number's close to 100, your percentages are pretty close to their real numbers. So this represents 9 people across the responses of 110 employees. And so I find that quite encouraging. District scores meaningfully surpass national engagement figures. We'll look at those specific numbers in just a minute, but there is one of the benefits of using Gallup's tool is that they have a massive database and are able to make some fairly substantial statements about the state of engagement across the United States, across the world really, but in our case, specific to the US. Every survey result set identifies 2 items that are called highest and 2 items called lowest in terms of scoring. These are weighted items based on a hierarchy that we'll look at or revisit momentarily. But in the case of the district, the 2 highest scoring items were the mission or purpose of my organization makes me feel my job is important. That's a nice place to see a high score. Suggests alignment with what people care about and the work they're doing. And then in the last year, I've had opportunities to learn and grow at work, suggesting that from a overall workforce development perspective, at least on the skills and competency side, the district is doing quite well. On the low end, and I will make a note, we'll look at these numbers in a second, but neither of these scores are actually truly low. They are just the district's lowest on the core 12 questions that make up the survey. I know what's expected of me at work, and I have the materials and equipment I need to do my job right, or to do my work right. Those are the lower scoring of the 12 items. As anticipated, there are areas of development and opportunity around safety, equity, and leadership, which were the additional questions that Michael referenced that we added to the survey before it was administered. 2 more quick notes. 2023 is your baseline year. First year of administration is always interesting, but not nearly as interesting as second, third, fourth, when you begin to have results, historical results, to compare not only to other operations and national figures, but to your own performance. And then finally, as I mentioned up front, what's mostly exciting about this is that this is a starting line. The survey itself is a launch pad. It is now a historical process with historical data that represents a 2-week period, a little over a month ago when employees responded. And really, it is a conversation starter more than anything. I would encourage staff and I would encourage members of the commission not to get too wrapped up in celebrating or too wrapped up in in I don't know, commiserating around areas of high performance or low performance, because one, this is your first year, and two, really what this is about is taking the information suggested by the data and initiating really meaningful conversations across teams. I want to just quickly revisit these three terms because they're going to show up and folks are going to have questions about what they mean. So there are three categories that Gallup breaks and that most surveys break employees or respondents into. Those are engaged, not engaged, and actively disengaged. So engaged employees are those that are highly involved in and enthusiastic about their work and their workplace. They categorize them as psychological owners, people who have a sense of pride or connection to their work and workplace that engender the sorts of thinking and behaviors that you might experience or expect from someone who owns a business or an operation. Engaged folks drive performance and innovation and are largely those responsible for moving the organization forward. This category of not engaged is a little bit, there's a potential for some cognitive dissonance here because it's not an inherently negative category. While these folks may be psychologically unattached to their work and company as a result, typically, of their engagement needs not being fully met, they do put in time. These are folks who show up, they do their job, they often, most of the time, do it well, but for them, it is a job. It is not closely tied to their particular interests, passions, or even values. Now, I think there are some interesting digging to be done here as we look at the district's numbers, just in terms of high mission alignment and an opportunity to convert, if you will, a number of the not engaged employees into the engaged category. And then finally, kind of the real liability are those who are actively disengaged. So these are folks who are unhappy at work. They aren't just unhappy that their needs aren't being fully met, but they're resentful, and as a result, they tend to act out that unhappiness and that resentment. These are folks who are also potentially, if not certainly, undermining the things that their engaged coworkers accomplish. As a result, Gallup has identified a ratio of engaged to actively disengaged that they say is most effective at countering or making up for those potential negative effects, and we'll look at that in just a second. So let's look at some numbers. These are national figures around engagement. Gallup uses an annually kind of revolving data set, so they're keeping things as current as possible. And this is based on a 15,000 person sample. 32% of employees across the United States are identified as engaged, half of employees as not engaged, and 18% as actively disengaged. These numbers have been going down in terms of engagement and up in terms of active disengagement or not engaged over the last several years. And so you'll find researchers like Gallup making a case for ways in which we need to rethink our approach to employee engagement. So remember these 32, 50, 18, and we'll look at district numbers. 32% engaged, so right on par with national numbers. 60% not engaged, so a higher number, which in some worlds would be of concern, but in this case, it's stealing from the actively disengaged number. So 8% actively disengaged versus 18% actively disengaged. You can see the actual numbers for each of these categories: 35, 66, and 9. And of course, the district's sample size is 110. So overall, I would say this does represent a meaningful difference from national figures in the right direction, which is to say, while the district's numbers are not surpassing national numbers when it comes to engagement overall, they are meaningfully outperforming disengagement, and that's a good sign. The work to move folks from disengagement into even not engaged is a very, very heavy lift. The work to move folks from not engaged into engaged is a much lighter lift and a fairly straightforward one, with some commitment and diligence. As I mentioned, Gallup has identified sort of an ideal ratio of engaged to actively disengaged in order to make up for that potential negative. Their number is 4 to 1. The national score is 1.8 to 1, which is a little bit discouraging. And but the district score is perfectly aligned with Gallup's recommendation, and that is, as you can see, a 4 to 1 difference. So on a national level and in an overall index, I would say these are desirable numbers and represent the kind of opportunity that you would want to see if you're not already performing at what Gallup might consider best practice organization. Just a reminder again, the survey is step 1. We've completed the survey. We are in the analyze and share phase and about to really dive into reflection on the staff level. And I want to encourage the commission and staff to embrace this idea of an 80-20 rule, where 80% or 20% of our focus is on the historical information and the past and what we can learn from that, and 80% is focused on the future. What strategies do we develop, design, and implement in order to improve the employee experience? So here, let's get into scores. This is the overall or grand mean. All of the scores you'll see are out of 5, not out of 10, which somebody noted in another recent conversation. I think that's worth reiterating, just so that you're not alarmed by these scores. The overall score across the core 12 questions is a 379, which is pretty solid for a first-time administration. I want to call your attention to the populations we've chosen to compare your results against. So there are 2 populations we'll be looking at, or 2 groupings that seem to best represent an apples to apples, or at least in the same general fruit family comparison for the district. One is utilities, who are administering the survey for the first time, and the other is local government, who are administering the surveys for the first time. So as the district represents something of a hybrid, because the utilities category includes private utilities, public utilities, we thought we would look at a set of numbers to kind of give us a little bit of nuance. And so this puts the district score smack in the middle, up against other utilities administering for the first time. So I think it's a solid place to start your engagement work. Again, I mentioned your high items and low items. So we're going to look at all 12 in just a second, but I wanted to call these out. You'll notice that the score of the one of the low items is a higher raw score than the score of one of the high items. That again is because of weighted ranking. I know what's expected of me at work is considered a basic need, and as a result is weighted more heavily than opportunities to learn and grow, which is considered a growth need, which is kind of at the top of the engagement pyramid. And I'll show you that again in just a second. So these may represent areas of potential investment on the part of managers and district leadership in order to improve employee experience. But that's a determination, I think, still to be made through conversation. This is kind of a very packed but one-stop shop for the 12 core questions plus satisfaction. So I want to call your attention to each of these columns so that you have a clear understanding of what it is you're looking at. Obviously, on the first column on the left is the item being assessed, the first being satisfaction, and the next 12 being the core 12 questions. The next column represents the current mean. So this is the district's cumulative score on that item. The third column is frequency distribution. And I think my instinct in looking at these numbers was affirmed listening to a Gallup session yesterday, which is that for a first-time administration, these frequency distributions are probably the most meaningful data points of the whole data set or data report. In that, when we look at the top, what Gallup calls the top box, which is the percentage of individuals that responded to any given item with a 5, which in this case would be strongly agree, or kind of the top box adjacent, which I would say is anyone who responded with a 4 or a 5, which still represents a fairly high level of agreement with the statement, gives you a good sense of overall performance in that area. So that middle column, those bars that you see represent percentages of individuals responding with a 1, with a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5. As you look across, note that the percentages are in bold, and the corresponding answer is not across each of these. So that's not a 1.1, that's a 1, and 1% of people that responded with a 1. The next column is a column I've added. This is not a part of the standard report, but it represents the percentage of 4 or 5. So I've taken the 51% responded with a 4 and the 17% responded with a 5 for a total of 68% of employees who responded with a 4 or a 5, just as a way of kind of pulling forward that that kind of high level of agreement on these items or high level of satisfaction on these items for your review. I'll talk about those in a second, but let's finish with the columns. The next column is the comparative rank alongside utilities and first administration. So this is a percentile ranking. So if we look at the very first statement here, which is around satisfaction, the district is in the 52nd percentile, meaning it performed better than 51.9% and a little bit lower score than about 48% of the remaining population. So this is comparing you just to a subset of Gallup's overall database identified as utilities administering the survey for the first time. And the last column is the same, except with comparison against local or governments. And so this is city, county, and state governments who are administering for the first time. What you want to see anytime you look at a Gallup report based on their color coding is lots of green, and the darker the green, the better, as that represents higher scores. I'll bring your attention back to that percentage number on the 4 or 5, and just note that with only one exception, and that is the 10th item, I have a best friend at work, which is notoriously low in first-time administrations. So there's nothing unique about district performance here. But with that exception, alongside, I guess, item 4, in the last 7 days, I've received recognition or praise for doing good work. The district is performing at 50% or better on a 4 or a 5 response, and pretty darn close on 4 as well. So there's a lot of kind of middle performance here, but there are a lot of bright spots, as Michael mentioned as well. Even the low scoring item, like I know what's expected of me at work, 79% of responses put that at a 4 or a 5. So it may be a low scoring item, but it's not a low score necessarily. And so it's good to look at these kind of contextually in that way. So again, I would recommend some focus on these kind of top box adjacent scores. A reminder that, as I mentioned before, the survey is built on a hierarchy. The first 2 items are basic needs items. The next 4 are about individual contribution. The next 4 about belonging in the team, and the last 2 about growth. We can look at questions grouped in those levels. And if we do, we can look at averages for those existing questions. So if we look at the basic needs, right below the triangle here, you'll see that 4.05 represents the combined score of the basic needs score, or basic needs items, putting the district in the 39th percentile against utilities with first administration. Likewise, we go up to the top individual tier, a 372, which is the 47th percentile. Teamwork, which is a 367, is the 47th percentile. And then growth, a 388, which is the 54th percentile. So, room for consideration in each of these categories. You've got strong scores and slightly lower scores in each one that kind of bring these to their percentile rank. But I think this can be a meaningful way of understanding engagement and needs through this particular hierarchy. The district opted to add an additional set of questions in 3 categories: safety, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and leadership. And so we'll look very quickly at those as well. We have no comparative data because Gallup does not have sizable enough samples to compare against. And in at least one case, we actually created a custom question. The rest of these questions come from their overall data or question bank. So I know how to proactively address risks in my work environment, and my coworkers report errors, near misses, and unsafe acts when they occur. A 388 and a 375. Again, you're looking at near 2/3 of population or respondents answered with a 4 or a 5 in each of these cases. I will note that the response rate for the second of these 2 questions was lower. I think only 95 individuals responded. Individuals had an opportunity through all the questions to choose to not respond to the question. I can make some guesses as to why folks wouldn't respond to the second one, starting with a sense of not knowing the answer to the question, whether coworkers are reporting errors or near misses or unsafe acts. Nothing of concern here from my perspective, but perhaps some opportunities for folks responsible for safety at the district to lean in and consider whether there are opportunities to increase training or education opportunities, or perhaps just communicate a little more about reported safety issues, so that folks have a more present understanding of how that's working. Second category, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are 3 questions here. At work, I'm treated with respect. At work, I feel comfortable being myself, and I have the same opportunities for advancement as other coworkers in my organization. Again, for the top 2, performing at a fairly high level in terms of overall strong response or strong agreement. I would say there's a story to understand in the third, where a little less than half strongly agreed or agreed with the statement that they have the same opportunities for advancement. As I've talked about with members of the HR team, the real opportunity here is to look at some cross sections of the data, investigate whether there are certain demographics or populations within the district that are scoring lower or higher, whether that might be race or gender or other categories. And so there's opportunity to do that. And I think that is very much the intention of the team to dig a little bit deeper, particularly on these questions. I'll also just make the case, as I mentioned with some other folks, that my recommended focus here would be to start with questions around racial equity. The rest of these things are unaddressable without meaningful conversations about racial equity, and it is the topic we avoid most actively due to our own discomfort with it. But if there is an interest and a desire to make improvements around this category, the conversations have to start there. And I think there seems to be some awareness of that within district staff and leadership. And then finally, the last set of questions are around leadership itself. 3 questions. I trust the leadership of my team. I trust the leadership of my organization, and leaders help me see how changes made today will affect my organization's future. As you see, relatively strong performance on leadership of my team, 70%. These 2 figures, leadership of organization and leaders help me see how my changes made today, have lower scores relative to high levels of agreement. And I think there's something to learn here for sure. Frankly, for me, one of the primary lessons I take away from a number of these responses is that there is a substantial opportunity, for increased and improved communication strategies and efforts to ensure that individuals across the workforce have a clear understanding. I also would say that I don't think it is atypical for an organization that is made up, the majority of whose staff is operational, to feel some degree of disconnect from administrative leadership and some of the decisions that are made at the administrative level. I don't think that's a justification or anything to lean on. It's just simply an observation. I see some tremendous opportunity here to ensure that the senior leadership team, the E team, the chief engineer are celebrating and communicating successes, failures, and ways in which decisions are intended to affect outcomes. So what's next? There are a series of steps that'll happen over the next few months, including manager training on the platform. They will, all managers who have access or who manage individuals will have access to the platform and will be trained on how to access their team-specific data, which is really where the juicy stuff lives. Managers will then receive training and support for state of the team meetings that each manager will hold with their teams, with the support of HR and myself to the extent needed. And then the real rubber will meet the road and action planning will take place at the team level and at the district level. Teams for sure will be asked to identify one and only one area of focus out of their results and develop plans or strategies to address that. The district may identify more than one, but I will push back hard to keep that number relatively low in order to really give it the attention it deserves and a meaningful opportunity to measure progress. There will be progress check-ins later in the year, likely a pulse survey or two to gauge folks' feeling about the progress. And then in June of next year, the district will be administering its second Q12, and that'll be a time of great interest because you'll finally have some historical data to compare your own performance. And I think that brings us to the end of this part of the presentation. I'm happy to field questions about the data or defer those to members of staff. And I see, Sarah, your hand up quickly, so I will go to you.
Okay. Thank you, BJ. Sarah, why don't you go first? You have your hand up.
Thank you. I realize I get to raise my hand. Others in the room probably could too, but BJ got to see my hand go up because we're virtual. Thanks for this, BJ. Super excited, as you can expect. I am very excited to see this data. A couple questions for you, and then maybe a couple questions that are more appropriate for staff. I'm interested, and maybe you don't know this yet, but if you saw any skew in the actively disengaged by area of the organization or by demographic, and if there are any other kind of team level or demographic cross-sectional discrepancies that you think the commission should be aware of at this time, and if not yet, I'd love to hear that when you and staff do get to that level of analysis.
Yeah, we haven't gone that deep yet to look at that. One of the real strengths of the Gallup process and a potential liability is that they are vehement about protecting respondent identity, and as a result will not publish results that risk in any way disclosing identity. So it may be that we can't say with any certainty that the disengagement lives, in a particular department or in a particular part of the organization. I do hope to be able to see a little more detail, at least, about ways in which there may be similarities between those folks who identified as actively disengaged. So yeah, and I think if there is insight to be gleaned there, then certainly I think that's insight the commission would and should be interested in. But at this point, we don't have that level of detailed analysis yet.
Okay, thank you. And then the question for either you or Mike or Michael or others on the staff team, I'm obviously really encouraged by the participation rate, and I'm curious, even if it's just anecdotal conversation or reaction or questions that, I know you presented this to staff already. Is there anything that would be interesting for the commission to hear about whether or not these results really seemed to resonate with staff, or if there were discrepancies or questions that people were teasing into that didn't feel quite right? Any of that more anecdotal conversation about these early conversations about results and just interested in takeaways.
Yeah. I'll just make a high level statement and then pass it to one of the staff to answer, whether they're kind of experiencing chatter or conversation, because obviously I'm not there to know that. But I would say, just make a note that I think the organizational level data is interesting. It can give you a decent picture of overall health of the organization relative to employee satisfaction and engagement. The real substance lives at the team level, because it gives you a picture of, it's the difference. It's the difference between a physical assessment of someone's health and a blood test, right? Where you can test for these very specific things, and the ability to look at that team level data is really what's going to drive change within the organization. Because reminder of that very first bullet that I shared, 70% of engagement is driven solely by the manager, by individual's direct manager. So, even when there are disconnects between the kind of operational teams and, say, senior leadership or administrative, those things are interesting, but they don't necessarily drive employee engagement, right? What drives employee engagement is the connection to relationship with, communication with a direct supervisor. So I don't know yet that people have the real substantive information to be having meaningful conversations about that until they look at their team level data. That said, everybody wants to know how the organization is performing overall. And so, there is something meaningful about that. Whether those conversations have started to pop up or not, I have to defer to Michael or Mike or someone on staff.
Yeah. This is Michael. Maybe Mike, you can jump in. I think anecdotally, we have results were presented Tuesday afternoon at a plant meeting. Our organization typically needs time to digest and look at the data and think about it. And just in my check-ins with supervisors, they want to see their results. They're excited to get their results because that's what's most meaningful to them is how is my team doing? What can I do? And so I think it's been positive from the employees that I've talked to, mostly supervisors.
Yeah, this is Mike Lipsky, HR manager. I've also had a couple of check-ins with supervisors and managers just to find out, is there chatter, are people talking? And I think it's a wait-and-see mode. I think, like BJ said, people are going to be interested more to see what the team-level data looks like and to engage in those conversations. So, at this point, I haven't heard any negative, like, oh, wait, that data is way off. I think people are just waiting.
Yeah, I would say that the questions that were asked at the plant meeting were thoughtful and relevant. So that's encouraging to me. And again, just the fact that the district had such a success in gathering responses, such a high response rate. I suspect people are, their teams are teams. People want to know how they scored. And of course, they kind of want to know how they scored relative to their other teams. Some of that will not necessarily be available, but the district will have to decide how it shares the full data set, once broken into teams. But each team is going to have some real meaningful substance to dig into to make some plans.
Okay. Marcia has her hand up, but before we go to Marcia, is anybody here? So we're going to have Marcia, then Beth, and then Brad, okay?
Hi, everyone.
Marcia, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. I guess maybe it's more for staff. I have a question sort of like, since I'm new, like BJ kept talking about how it's the first year of administration, and I'm thinking, well, this entity has been around a long time, so it's got to be previous surveys. And just kind of the evolution of how you came up with choosing this Gallup approach, and also, any kind of, like, how did we end up here? Because I assume there have been previous surveys.
Commissioner Romo, we have done previous surveys. They've been a completely different format and really hard to measure or compare with. And using the Q12 was one that we could replicate, and we could compare ourselves to other organizations relative how we're doing. So that's why the Q12 and why we're using it now, and we're making a increased focus on workforce engagement. It's one of our performance areas in our strategic plan. Has put resources into it through a new position, Amy Deming, help support this work and do a meaningful job moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just note that the district has committed to this particular tool for 3 years running. So is engaged with Gallup. That's a direct engagement with Gallup to use the tool for the next 3 years. Most organizations that do that then go on to use the tool for many years because Gallup has such a substantial database and is so widely used. This tool is so widely used that that current comparative data is almost always available and proven through research to be predictive of performance, of productivity. And so those, I obviously was a proponent of this particular tool. It's the tool I suggested the district use. There are others out there. But the two things that I think have been liabilities in the past are not using a consistent tool, and then you don't have meaningful comparative data, and not necessarily using a tool that lays a clear path for action. And so can often leave people, in fact, many engagement survey processes leave people feeling less engaged because they don't feel as though the results have had follow-up. And the Gallup process is designed, and the process that the staff has designed to ensure that is not the case. So I think it was a good choice from a kind of methodology and tool perspective. And whether I'm engaged in that or not in the future, the fact that the district now has a sort of a baseline to work with and a guaranteed couple of years of future data, I think is a real asset.
Yes, anecdotally, I worked at a large government institution and they surveyed us pretty regularly. So your observations about how people relate to their team is like, that's your people, right? You deal with them every day. Maybe you go up a step in the management routine, but you don't ever, I mean, you might see the head managers, but other than to say hi in the hallway, they're not really like sitting down with you and talking about what do you need to do? How can I help you? So there's always that disconnect. And I know it's not always intentional, but sort of how these institutions get set up. So thank you.
Okay, Beth, and then Brad.
I want to just mention, BJ, thank you. This is a great presentation, and I really appreciate all the work that you put into it and all the data that you presented to us. I think that was really, really helpful for me anyway, and I think the commission really sort through all this. A couple of thoughts. One is following up with the teamwork is really a great way to do it. But I want to ask a question about whether the leadership will be involved with the teams and the team supervisors or managers in training them and helping them develop an action plan and then implementing that action plan. And then related to that is how the commission will be involved in the process as well along the steps. So, when will we be, informed of what, the steps are going forward and things like that. So just making sure that we're kind of in touch with all of that as well. And then just a thought I had in looking at all the data and the work I've done in the past with engagement surveys for large corporations, I see an opportunity for a kind of a low-hanging fruit kind of thing, and that is rewards and recognition for employees, because that seemed to be an area that people felt that they weren't getting recognized for their work, and that's something that's really easy to implement. So just a thought on that.
Yeah, a couple of notes on the latter. Agreed. The data coming out of Gallup is increasingly suggesting that the changing workforce requires meaningful conversation with their supervisors or managers on a fairly frequent basis, and that maybe as frequently as weekly. That recognition does in fact matter quite a bit. Gallup is updating the Q12 with an optional, they're calling it the Q12 plus, with an optional 4 questions that focus on customer experience, diversity, and a couple of other categories. And one of the things that they suggest around that is that the opportunity for individuals to have a meaningful connection with their supervisor or manager is an increasing expectation of members of the workforce today in ways that it was not even 5 years ago. But certainly as you go back further, 10 years, 15 years. So, and it's not a heavy lift. It may feel upfront like it requires a certain amount of time, and it does certainly. But Gallup would also suggest that the primary responsibility of any manager of people is to ensure the engagement of their team, because it is the engagement of their team that leads to higher productivity, is the engagement of their team that leads to higher impact, to better results. So, that would be the suggestion of their research. And then relative to your first observation, well, it may be better to defer to Michael to respond, or to staff to respond to that. But I'm happy to give it a shot if that doesn't make sense.
I'll jump in. Thanks, Commissioner Bookland. Mike Lipsky again. Just to remind the commission about process and involvement. So the next steps after this is to get the managers with their team level data. That's going to be fully supported by HR. BJ will provide some instructions for accessing the data, but then the goal is to get some in-person training set up for managers to conduct those state of the team meetings. And those state of the team meetings, the intention is that they'll be facilitated by HR. So HR will definitely be providing support to managers going through that process. The goal of those state of the team meetings is to develop an action plan around one item. And then just to remind the commission, in the resolution passed back in April, I think, around the process, our intention is to come back to the commission by the end of the year to talk about action plans that have been developed and different teams are doing. So we intend to keep the commission informed as to progress, and then, clearly as we give the survey year over year, continuing to involve the commission as far as how the results have changed. New action plans are being developed. That's our process going forward.
Thanks, Mike. I didn't want to commit you to anything that you weren't prepared to commit to. I will just note that the action plans, that one of the nice things about the Gallup platform is the action plans will be built and kind of logged in one system, which will give HR and managers an opportunity to kind of track progress and see all of those things in one place. So there's a way to kind of build gentle but direct accountability, both for creating the plan and then for tracking progress on the plan, right in the system, that doesn't require the district to develop any new systems or any new tracking measures. It can be done right on the platform.
Brad, you got a question?
Yeah. First, I wanted to just echo what I've heard from several other commission members. I think it was a great idea that we did the survey. I'm looking forward to the follow-up by the teams and the next surveys in the coming years. The follow-up work that you're proposing is spot on with plans. So I think that all that's good. I did have a question on, and I don't know if you presented it during your presentation. If you did, I missed it. If you could tell me what the response rates were for each of the 3 leadership questions. Was there a difference in the response rates for those?
I can look at the detailed data. Give me just a minute to pull that up. I don't recall there being a substantial discrepancy in response rate on those. But give me just 1 second and I will pull up that particular part of the report.
If you can't lay your hands on it quickly,
No problem.
some
I can
point,
get there, and yeah, I can get there pretty quick.
Okay.
Let me just go to the additional questions here. So on the leadership questions, there was no discrepancy. There were 110 responses for the first two questions and 109 for the third, as opposed to some of the others. Safety was 106.95, DEIB 109, 110, 108. So there was almost 100% of respondents responded to each of those three questions.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, thank you very much, BJ. It's very interesting. I look forward to, as the process goes on, and I echo what Brad said, all the steps make sense, and good work to you and the team that was involved that led it, Mike. Okay.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity. It's great to visit with you all again, and look forward to sharing next steps.
Okay, that will take us to our second quarter report card. Michael?
Yes, I'll take that on. And this is our second quarter report card for the members of the public, and just reminding the commission, every year the commission approves focus items. You'll be approving actually focus items for 2024 next month. And focus items are areas on an organizational level that we're working on, that we incorporate into the budget, and usually require resources, not just money, but significant staff resources. So it's not everything we do. It's some of the things where we're trying to adapt as a district and change and improve, and that's what focus items tend to focus on. And when focus items become part of our day-to-day work, then they're no longer a focus item here. They're built into our programs, and you'll see in my report that some of those items are moving to programmatic work and are no longer focus items. So the first couple are I&I. You may recall way back in January, it seems like a long time ago, we shared our plan for implementation of inflow and infiltration work through 2026. We hired a new expert, HDR, to give a fresh perspective to build on all the good work that Brown and Caldwell has done. Things are on track, and we're focusing on flow monitoring this year and on technical guidance and educational resources. This is something our owner communities really wanted us to focus on, is on educational resources, and that's one of the things we're doing. We plan to return to you this fall, to the commission, to review and just refresh our 2024 work plan with you, and just refresh your minds on what we're doing. Climate mitigation, we have this as a yellow because this has been a really great process for us. We are learning so much, and the industry is changing. Based on how we used to think about climate mitigation work and how do we do it now, and how our organizations who are forward-facing in this, how are they looking at it? We've got a lot of great input from the greenhouse gas cohort through the U.S. Water Alliance, where cities around the country are tackling this, and we are learning their best practices, and we've also consulted with experts in the field. We're pilot testing an approach to measure greenhouse gas emissions in our capital projects, and we are learning that these industry best practices are changing. There's more of an emphasis on policy development, baselining, and integrating results with the capital plan, because that's where the money goes and that's where you get the results. And we will be coming to the commission this fall and share what we are learning, and somewhat of a paradigm shift in some ways, and receive your early guidance on whether we're on track with the plan. panel will be eventually approved next. Equity, we have a study session on August 17th. It'll be an in-person meeting, and I'll be facilitating this, and I'm going to focus on actionable steps that we can work on, and over time. There are 50, 60, 70 things we could do in the equity area, and externally, we have things working internally, which we're working on in internal equity and diversity, but externally, this is what the focus of the commission is going to be. And so we'll be discussing what makes sense, what's realistic, and come up with a plan for what we're going to do first, and items that we should think about. Fast, we are in phase 3 sampling and monitoring program. Marty shared with you in February what we're doing, and really we're trying to close information gaps and knowledge gaps, and to align our testing with new DNR administrative rules. We will have a better understanding of PFAS impacts on biosolids, and we expect to receive a final report on the monitoring in the next month or so. After we have a chance to digest this information, we will return to the commission, and this likely PFAS monitoring is something that is part of our program now. And while we will give reports, it likely is not a focus item anymore because we've built capacity in to do this extremely important work. Service charges and rate structure. We followed up with a fiscal work group after our last meeting with the commission in March. You asked us to do that, and we are proceeding with providing owner communities with earlier bill estimates, but we are not making any other major changes in methodology for 2024. We learned in the last meeting there is some risk, or owners feel that there is some risk in changing the billing methodology because mostly of industrial users. And if you have an industrial user who's paying into your system and giving you revenue, and then we charge a bill, if you lose that revenue source, it puts some of our owner communities at risk. I think what we learned from this, it highlights the need for us to look at industrial program. You know, we are a growing utility, going from a relatively small to a larger utility, and we're almost at the cusp of having to look at separating out industrial users and looking at that differently. But we still need to have some internal discussions about that, and there'll be more to come on that work. Badger Mill Creek compliance, we're still waiting for our initial response from the DNR on our preferred compliance solution. Ashley Brecklin from the DNR, we just received a note from her this week that is likely that the DNR will have some initial questions as part of their review process, and they will hope to get back to us shortly. So that's the latest correspondence with the DNR. But meanwhile, we have put an RFP, a request for proposal, has been out to hire a facilitator for the stakeholder group process that the commission has authorized. We've received 3 proposals, and we have narrowed our selection, and we'll be bringing that cost proposal to you once we have finalized our negotiations. It's in the range of about $150,000, and we expect to launch this group in September, the stakeholder group, and it'll be a year-long process. ERP, let's talk about this enterprise resource planning. We received a report from our consultant Baker Tilly on needs assessment that they did of our software systems and business systems, and they gave us that report in June, and there were kind of 4 key takeaways that I heard from their report. One, our WAM system that we've called it requires humans instead of efficient systems, so it depends on, it's a lot of labor, there's a lack of automation, our systems are decentralized and somewhat fragmented, and they're so highly customized to make things work. We are changing the terminology to ERP, which is Enterprise Resource Planning, as an integrated software approach. And our first step will be hiring a project manager to help us manage this project. Baker Tilly said this could be a 5-year or more long process to do this. You have to bring employees along on this because it changes everything we do, and we're setting up a steering committee to work on that because it's such a massive undertaking. And the first step will be for us to do a needs assessment. Make sure we're defining what are the critical system requirements before we out an RFP to select the vendor. We're in this for the long haul, and this work is starting. Diversity, equity, inclusion with Amy Deming on board, our organizational development professional. She's really launching our efforts here in a really important way, and we're focusing on our current state, and she's working with the executive team and with our inclusion and diversity committee to get a sense of our current state. And then we're also going to be developing an initial action plan and then some basic training coming up, manager-specific training will be coming later this year. Executive team leadership. As an executive team, for all the directors and managers that are part of the executive team, we have been focusing on budget, on performance indicators, which we'll be sharing with you next month, the engagement survey, diversity, equity, inclusion, and also looking at 2024 focus items, which I'll be presenting to you next month. We've had a lot on our plate and working forward. It's yellow because we just haven't had enough time to do the prioritization of elements, and we need to get through the budget and some of these other items. We have a lot of work. It's really been engaged and putting a lot of time. Emergency management. In late 2022, we've had discussions about this topic, and I think we discovered a couple things as an E-team. That topic is so broad, but we have neither the expertise or the capacity to do this. Without real clear definitions, we cannot prioritize work, develop meaningful actions here. So we're taking it off our plate because we just have too much stuff on our plate. But that does not mean work is not being done on this topic, and there are many things that, as I outlined in the report, things that we are doing to secure emergency operations. That'll have to be reevaluated at a future. So with that, I'll pause there to see if the commission has any questions or thoughts for me.
Anybody have any questions? Don't see anybody. Good. Okay, so we've got about 55 minutes left until Tom has to leave.
Tom, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Michael, just a couple quick questions, or maybe just pieces of feedback. On the equity item, you mentioned that, the commission was going to be engaged in the public facing. I guess my feedback is I'd love to ensure that the commission is also being really supportive of the internal organizational work and apprised of progress and priority initiatives on the internal work as well. And then I would love to understand more about the ERP shift. It feels like a big change from what we were expecting in this project, and it's going to require a lot more resources. So perhaps we can put that on the agenda to dive a little bit deeper into with the commission at a future date.
Yeah, good point.
That sounds good.
ERP. Okay,
Thank you.
Bill, you had a comment?
I just want to take a quick moment on the ERP, just because I think it's timely. The terminology feels like a large shift, but the plan itself is not. This is really a focusing of things that we knew we were facing anyway. Key change that's reflected in Michael's comments, getting clarity that the first step in addressing our large system issues is to get, quote, ERP, that is to say financial management and HR systems settled first, and then move on to maintenance management. So for anyone outside to understand, but the clarity that came from Baker Tilly and the decisions that followed are a big step forward. I do not regard them as a fundamental change either in the scope of the problem or really what we have to do. I regard it as more a real step forward in terms of clarity and actionability.
Okay, so Tom has to leave in about 50 minutes at 10:30. So is there anybody else that has a time crunch? They want to keep us moving because we do have a closed session yet? Okay, so then we'll go to the CED update.
I'll be extremely brief because we have a lot on our plate, but I did want to thank Bill Walker for filling in for me over the last couple of weeks while I was on vacation. And I also want to thank the entire leadership team, the executive team here, who really stepped up and did a great job. So I just want to make that thank you, and everything else can wait.
Operations report, Alan?
Good morning, Commissioners. Andy's meeting. I'll be giving the monthly operations report for the month of June. And I'll also be giving an update for high solids TSS violation that we had here earlier this month. It will not specifically show up on this dashboard, but it will be reflected next month in the July metrics. So June plant performance, most of the parameters we're seeing within the normal operating range. And within, a lot of them are at or below historical norms. The exception is that being the total suspended solids, the 9.1, which is a bit more foreshadowing of what's coming, what I'll be presenting on a little bit later. And then the phosphorus, which I've mentioned in meetings before, that goes kind of hand in hand because we do a biological phosphorus removal system. So any question on the June performance metrics, all were within permit parameters for the month of June. Resource recovery refresh, we've been doing updates on these quarterly. Basically, we're at the midpoint of the year through the month of June, and so you can roughly double the numbers that are shown there. We're pretty much right on track for clean water being the effluent we're putting out back to the environment, returning to surface waters. Just over halfway. Projecting out, we look a little bit more than what we've done the last couple of years. But as dry as it's been, I suspect that those numbers will look very much alike unless we start getting significantly more rain. The rains we've been having really haven't been impacting our influent numbers much. It's been dry enough that it's all been uptaken, which is a good thing. Any questions on this recovery metric? I'm moving through these fairly quickly just because I understand we're short of time. Biosolid storage, we're at 58.1% through the month of June. Summer haul out has started. You may have seen a few trucks going by this morning. Summer wheat is starting to open up, so we are starting to get some easing on that as we go in there. We're looking at storage good until beginning of October right now, so we're in good shape as far as that goes. Struvite recovery numbers, the line on the graph does not necessarily reflect how far along we are. If you actually double those numbers, you can see we're actually on a pace that's a little faster than what we've been. We're at a higher production rate than we have been. We're looking to project out to be a higher number than we've done the past few years. So, and that's we've had some particular focus on trying to improve both the amount we're producing and the efficiency, a focus on the cost. So, any questions on this metric? I got to thinking after I put the slides in last night, I don't want to read a wall of text to you. This will be in the recording if you want to go back and read it. What we had basically, and I'll caveat a little bit, when we're reporting as we go through this, when we're talking about actual results and lab results, those come to us, they have to be, lab result for 1st of July, for example, that is midnight to midnight on the 1st of July. So that gets submitted to the lab after midnight on the 2nd of July, goes through processing. And so we see the results, the actual official results after the event. And so, late in June, we started to see, numbers climbing up. We spiked above our monthly limit. And I should, when I show the limits on here, our limits are quite complicated. We have weekly limits, monthly limits, sometimes daily limits. And so I try to show those at the 10 milligram per liter, which is our most restrictive monthly solids limit. We do have other limits that apply. So we did see in late June, 23rd and 24th, the data showed we had popped up and then came back down. We felt at the time it was due to an algae control rotation, which we do to control algae in our final clarifiers. And I'll show a couple of quick pictures later to depict that. The numbers started to come back down, but then gradually began climbing back out again. Coming out of the first weekend of July into the third new month, we're seeing, data still looks like it's slowly climbing. We elected to basically, we could see what we saw on the third of there. We saw it was still climbing. We decided to hold and wait until how it went through the fifth, because we'd made some changes there, and the biological system takes some time to make some adjustments. On the fifth, visually, we still didn't have the lab data, but we knew that visually it did not look like we were performing up to snuff. So what we did operationally was what I call try to simplify operations. We basically suspended algae control rotations because there is some solids excursion as we bring those in and out of service. We also discontinued, we had a sludge wasting trial going on in the East plant that was making it more difficult to control our sludge age, which is a reflection of how old the sludge is. That's very closely controlled in a biological system and has impacts on the performance. And so we went back to our standard wasting system on that. The reason we were doing that was because that plays into trying to optimize some of the chemical use and things for the struvite production. So it results in a more concentrated feed stream to that process. So we suspended that trial. We also, and this might seem counterintuitive, we reduced the number of online clarifiers. So what we did, again, to simplify, we took fewer processes. Hydraulically, our flows were not up, so we did not need the hydraulic capacity to clarifier. So we were basically bringing down to fewer unit processes online to better focus on the units we had. 8th and 9th coming out of that as we started to make those changes. Those were the worst days. That was the first full weekend of July. Correction, that was the weekend after the 4th. So I guess that would have been, it became apparent then coming out of that into the next week that we mathematically were going to have a violation. We knew we were going to violate the Badger Mill Creek week 1 total suspended solids limit. And we knew it was highly likely we were going to violate both Badfish and Badger Mill for week 2. And so we informed DNR of that. And then gradually the numbers started to come down. On the 15th, we got results that finally came back down to our normal numbers. And actually things look really good right now. That's kind of a synopsis of what the event was, is really looking for root causes. It'd be nice if we had something that was basically point to like an equipment failure or a mistake. It really looks like just our biological system just got a little bit out of whack. Had a lot of theories on what was going on, and we're still investigating. The biggest correlating parameter I found actually is we were carrying a little bit higher volatile biological mass at that time than historical. And that's really just a function of your mass. You've got particles that are living and particles that aren't. So we had a little bit more of the solids in the tanks. We had a bit more that was actually active biology. And so that may play into a process called denitrification. And what we get, and these are a couple examples, I took these actually yesterday, and we sometimes refer to them to like size, uncommon objects, tennis balls, golf balls, footballs, things like that. And you can see here just these clumps. And so what we get is, because we've got such high nitrogen loads, when we get into the summertime months, a lot of times if you've watched our effluent for a while, summertime months we have a little bit higher solids in that. And so what's happening is our plant doesn't actively denitrify. Phase 2, we're looking at liquid processing. We're looking at trying to implement that, but we're not required to do that per permit. And so we get a higher load of nitrogen that's been coming to the plant. We convert that then to the organic nitrogen and then ammonia nitrogen. That all gets converted to ammonia and then nitrified in our process to convert that to nitrate. And so because of that, we've got very low levels of ammonia going out, which is what in compliance with a permit. We also have very high levels of nitrate going out, which we have no limit on that. That nitrate is food for denitrifying organisms that we have in our process. And particular sludge ages, if we get a little bit out of bounds on that, or particular conditions, warmer conditions, they tend to then take that additional step and convert that to nitrogen gas. And that nitrogen gas then in that sludge blanket on the bottom of the clarifier will cling to that and float that sludge to the top, which is kind of what you're seeing there, those clumps coming in. So those can be problematic if they get, this is very clean for this time of year. Sometimes we'll get 10, 20, even 50% surface coverage as it pushes that ahead. And so that can be quite extensive this time of year. This clarifier, clarifier 7, just for trivia, is part of Plant 2. Plant 2 is historically where we fight this tendency the most. So reasons we don't fully understand, it could be the design of the clarifier. These are just a little bit, and I don't have an arrow here, but when I talk about coming off algae control rotation, in the upper left, there's a picture of a clarifier last year coming off algae control rotation. And the pictures are kind of small, but you can kind of see there's a fairly heavy level of solids on the top of that. But between the baffle and the effluent weir, that's very clear. And so as that comes up, that small surface area clears rather quickly, resumes normal effluent. And what the operator tries to do at that point is hold the level right there at the weir so that sweep arm can take that off and remove that. That's a normal rotation that we would try and do. But doing that is disruptive, and so that's what the kind of operation we suspended when we tried to simplify this. And then these other pictures are just kind of the mechanism at the bottom of the clarifier, which you don't usually see, and then clumps of popping sludge. I'm just, I guess, going into this basically to help understand a little bit better what we believe was the root cause, the biggest contributor to this process. The other thing I thought was illustrative, I wish I had thought to take pictures earlier of what the effluent was looking like. So this is as we were starting to come out of the event, and all three of these, in my opinion, look pretty good effluent. If you were kayaking or swimming in this in the lake or river, you wouldn't think much of that. But as the ones on the farther left have more fines, if you look closely, there's some fine particulates in there. For the record, the numbers are down there, 14.2, 12.5, and then a clean sample here at 5.7. And so, and these pictures here basically just represent a grab. It's a snapshot in time. So that quality can vary at a particular time. So maybe I got a particularly good moment on these, but that's kind of what we were dealing with. And this kind of looked like these beakers are what we're doing operationally, looking at in the moment in time, looking at how it looks like coming off the clarifiers, what it looks like in a beaker. But we really don't know the results until the lab results come in. Oftentimes on a weekday they can come in pretty quickly, but you're still kind of driving in the rearview mirror, so to speak. So I covered a lot there in a short period of time. I know you're short of time, but I would welcome any questions now, or if you want to reach out to me directly, that would be fine as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Very informative. Anybody have any quick questions? Okay, we'll move on. Regulatory and legal.
I will also try and keep this brief, but just to note that June time was hot. This was a plus-hour month for us. And interestingly, we've spent so much time talking about regulatory compliance in Badger Mill Creek. There were some of that in June, but actually June was a lot about contracts and acquisition, which we'll be hearing about. Some non-disclosure agreements, a conservation property issues, and actually an intellectual property question involving some patent and copyright issues. That for now, unless there's
Sorry. The future meeting schedules in the pack, but I just wanted to mention on Monday, Michael, Ezra, Bill, and I talked about which ones will be in person for the next few months. So Michael mentioned the 17th of August that we have a study session, and typically we do study sessions in person. Then we're moving to 9/28. That's the public hearing on the budget with some deliberation on the budget as well, or discussion. Then we move to 10/12 will be in person because that will be further deliberation by us on the budget to give our final viewpoints so staff can tweak or whatever they need to do to the budget. So that will take us through October. What you do notice is the 26th meeting where we approve the budget would be virtual. My thinking was that most of the work that we'll do will be at that 12th and 28th meetings, and that by the time we get to the 26th, hopefully we've pretty much got a consensus on stuff. Does that make sense for everybody? So it's the 17th of August, the 28th of September, and the 12th of October. We're trying to keep it to one a month. Okay, so that will take us to the convene and closed session. We have two topics. A is closed session one, convene and closed session in accordance with 19851E of the Wisconsin statutes for purpose of deliberating or negotiating the acquisition of easements from Grandview Properties LLC, Parcel 2, for the Pumping Station 17 Forced Main Relief Phase 2 because of competitive bargaining reasons require a closed session. B is closed session 2 is convene and closed session in accordance with 19.851C of the Wisconsin statutes to consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and its performance briefing by the chief engineer and director. We need a roll call vote.
Commissioner Bookland.
We need a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll be
Yeah,
happy.
Motion by,
I'll be happy to make the motion that we go into closed session, based on, the agenda items 6A and 6B as stated by President Hovell. Do I need to read them again?
no.
Thank you.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Murphy, second by
It's Wilson. I'll
Commissioner
second.
Wilson. Sorry, I was getting ahead there. Okay, now, roll call vote.
Commissioner Bookland. Aye. Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
Commissioner Eskridge.
Aye.
Commissioner Hubble.
Aye.
Commissioner Murphy.
Aye.
Commissioner Romo.
Aye.
Commissioner Swanson. I'm sorry. John Mullis. Commissioner Wilson.
Aye.
And Commissioner Freeze.
Aye.
I hope that was everyone.
Was anyone missed? I don't think so. Okay. Motion's approved. We'll move into closed session.
They're coming back, Amanda. Oh, yeah, there they are.
Thank you, Commissioner Eskridge.
Okay, sorry about that. We had a motion to go back into open session, roll call vote. It was fully unanimous, all ayes. Tom Wilson departed about 10:35 a.m. and Marcia Rummel departed about 11 a.m., so they were not participating in the vote or to go back into open session because they had departed the meeting, but we still maintain the quorum. So that takes us back to, we have to take action on item A, and I got to get that up here, is 6A. We will need a motion on our resolution 0727R9 to approve the acquisition jurisdictional offer regarding property, Grandview Properties LLC. Do we have a motion?
Yeah, it's Murphy. I'd be happy to make the motion to approve resolution 2023-07-27-R9.
Okay, we have a motion to approve that resolution. Do we have a second?
This is Commissioner Bookland. I'll second.
Motion by Commissioner Murphy, second by Commissioner Bookland to approve the resolution relative to the Grandview Properties LLC. Any further comments or discussion? Hearing none, all of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? None. Motion carries. Regarding closed session number 2, we heard various performance evaluation data from Michael and had some discussions, and we'll be continuing those discussions as we talked about a few months ago, actually, with his performance evaluation. So, anybody else have anything for the good of the order? Future agenda topics or other business? Tom Wilson's gone, so do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, Commissioner Clark.
Motion by Commissioner Clark, second by Commissioner Freeze to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody, for your patience with this long meeting.